lots. Don't. I'm keeping mine actively right here just in case.
Yeah. But this hadn't even been edited once, so everything is going to change.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
This
we
was
have no idea what we're
before-
saying.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
It
It
could
would be
all
nice
change.
to just glance at it for 10 seconds.
It's starting like now.
This is why we should have computers in here so that we can look at the thing.
I mentioned that last week. It didn't happen. I guess it didn't need to happen though.
Script. Thank you. Sure. Give me your old scripts.
I kind of want it just in case.
You can keep it, but make sure you don't.
I won't look at it unless I have to.
Is this all the parts? This is just the first act. I'm sorry, you guys. Okay. Yeah. The second act and third act are almost done. We're just about.
Love it. Yeah, and it will be clear in Ollie's script.
Wait.
You see, and on this special episode of.
So now it says what? Oh, okay.
Wait, what happened?
Oh, no. On this special episode of Uptown Radio, we'll be discussing some of those stories. Just a second. Today, we visited This looks good.
Yeah.
Then,
Should that door be closed? I can close
so
it.
we're getting more scripts.
Are we?
hopefully.
I don't know if we're getting them before the show starts.
Second. No? Maybe not. Most people don't go looking for a fight.
Although the show does start with 5 minutes of me blabbering on.
We'll do great.
We can close it maybe.
Carl-Johan, du lyssnar väl? Johan? Ja? Vi är live om 1 minut.
Nej!
Jo!
I understood enough of that. Get all your burps out. Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers.
6 laxar i en laxask. No, 7 sjuka sjömän. Sjöbröder.
What to do to die today at a minute or two to two. A thing distinctly hard to say but harder still to do.
Röra i Rogers rabarberrabatt.
But we're not even starting, so it's like... Oh, I'm gonna have to listen to myself first.
Mm-hmm.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Daniel Rostis. We're all searching for something. It could be a new job, it could be a little bit of peace and quiet, it could be a new way to connect with other people.
I'm Muslim by background, but for me, anti-Semitism is not acceptable at all. And I wanted to do something against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia.
That's Nabil Ezarhouni. He says he's looking for a new way to fight discrimination here in New York.
I wanted to have a positive answer, something much more constructive than basically just have some, just responding to hate or responding to racism.
And he says there's a reason he's so preoccupied with this issue.
I grew up in a very poor area when there were a lot of immigrants from North Africa and Muslim immigrants and other immigrants.
He grew up in France. He says it's a very multicultural society, but it's easy to get stuck in your own enclaves and not meet other cultures. Specifically,
when I was living there until I was a teenager, I didn't interact with Jews. That's the thing.
I basically grew up only around Jews, so I get where he's coming from, but from the other side. But that's why I was pretty surprised when I heard what he's doing now.
We decided to celebrate Passover in a mosque. It's not just about Jews and Muslims, but we want to address to people that are very curious about Judaism or Islam.
They were celebrating Passover, the Jewish holiday that starts tonight, but they were doing it a little bit in advance. Definitely not the kind of thing I ever imagined happening in a mosque, but a rabbi, an imam, and over 100 guests gathered and celebrated the Israelites leaving slavery in Egypt, just like a Muslim holiday called Ashura. But at its core, this Passover in a mosque was like any other celebration. people connecting, getting to know each other, enjoying some good food and good conversation.
They were very emotional. It was a very positive moment because I was running around asking people if they were happy, about the food, about how they were welcome. And they were so pleased to have something positive about Jews and Muslims that, we can share. So that was a unique experience. I'm personally moved when I talk about it.
Now, he organizes events like this every few months with the NYC Muslim-Jewish Solidarity Committee. You yourself, why would you want to get involved with the group that does this? You know what I mean? Like, what inspired you to get involved?
I just want to appreciate the diversity and make sure that people are talking to each other. Because if Jews and Muslims are able to go beyond this negative narrative, beyond that, political agenda or media or anything, and trying to go beyond that, I think it will be a good step, not only for Jews and Muslims, for New York City, but for the whole world.
I found out about the event because I was looking for something to do on Passover. And although I couldn't make it, I thought this was such an interesting idea for a group. People searching for a way to escape from the accepted narrative, a way to connect with each other as humans and ignore labels. The next major event, Ramadan in a synagogue. Ezar Houni and those who come to these events are just some of the many people living in New York who are searching for something, as we all are.
And on this special episode of Uptown Radio, we'll be discussing some of those stories.
I'm Daniel Rostis.
And I'm Åsa Secker. Today, we'll visit a hair salon in Crown Heights in search of the perfect natural style.
She told me, she said, I don't know why you put that thing on your head. It's not for our kind of people. So I'm like, huh? What do you mean?
And after a year in solitary confinement, what Chris Acosta wants most is peace of mind.
Until you get back into normal society and you realize how that experience has changed you, nothing can really prepare you for how it's actually going to be.
Summer is right around the corner. Are you chasing the perfect wave? Well, be prepared to hop on the train. Can you imagine making this trip with a surfboard?
No, I can't. That would be really annoying, actually.
And in a moment, we'll step into the cage with an MMA athlete itching for a fight.
This is something I gotta do. This is not a hobby. This is not recreational for me. I can't wait for New York to finally set up something.
All that and more on Uptown Radio, but first, the news.
In New York, I'm Oliver Arnoldi. Authorities say that they've completed the autopsy on Prince's body earlier this afternoon, but preliminary results won't be released for several days. The 57-year-old was found dead yesterday morning at his estate in Paisley Park, Minnesota. His body will be released to his family later today. Funeral plans have yet to be announced. As President Obama began his final trip to Britain as the US head of state, he urged the UK to stay in the European Union. This has caused controversy among supporters of the UK's exit from the bloc, who are accusing him of meddling in British affairs. Laura Gamba has the story.
In a joint appearance with British Prime Minister David Cameron, President Obama said that if Britain exits the European Union, it could delay bilateral US-UK trade deals.
The United States wants a strong United Kingdom as a partner. And the United Kingdom is at its best when it's helping to lead a strong Europe.
David Cameron, who supports staying in the European Union, welcomed President Obama's views.
But I've never felt constrained in any way in strengthening this relationship by the fact that we're in the European Union. In fact, quite the reverse.
Others were not so pleased with Obama's comments, and some observers are already saying this will be a defining moment in the referendum campaign. British voters will decide on June 23rd whether or not the UK remains within the European Union. Laura Gamba, Columbia Radio News.
Prime Minister David Cameron and President Obama are holding talks on important foreign issues today. According to a report released today, the rate of people in the United States dying of suicide has risen to its highest level in nearly 3 decades. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports that since 1999, suicide rates have increased in all age groups between 10 and 74. The rise was most severe for women aged between 45 and 64, which went up by 63%. The study also found an alarming increase among adolescent girls, whose rate tripled. American Indians had the steepest rise among ethnic groups, while the suicide rate declined for only one racial group, black men. Governor of Virginia Terry McAuliffe has passed a law allowing over 200,000 formerly convicted felons to cast votes in the swing state of Virginia in the presidential election in November. Mark Herring, Attorney General of Virginia, says the state has to do more to make African Americans vote.
This is really in Virginia a holdover from the laws designed really to disenfranchise African Americans back in the times of Jim Crow.
The Sentencing Project, an advocacy group, estimates nearly 6 million Americans are barred from voting because they've been convicted of a felony. Leaders from at least 175 countries signed the Paris Agreement at the United Nations today, a key step towards implementing the world's most comprehensive agreement to address global warming. Under the agreement, countries set their own targets for reducing emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. UN Messenger of Peace and actor Leonardo DiCaprio says it's a step towards practical change.
Think about the shame that each of us will carry when our children and grandchildren look back and realize that we had the means of stopping this devastation, but simply lacked the political will to do so.
The targets are not legally binding, but they must be updated every 5 years. The government of Venezuela says it will shut down power nationwide for 4 hours a day beginning Monday. The announcement comes amid a drought in the country that has made water levels plummet at Aguri Dam in the northeast of the country. The hydroelectric plant produces most of Venezuela's electricity. The cuts will last for 40 days or until the water levels stabilise. Oliver Arnoldi, Columbia Radio News.
Most people don't go looking for a fight, but for the past 6 years, Jerome Mikkel has been doing just that. He's been trying to become a professional fighter in mixed martial arts, or MMA. If you've never seen it, professional MMA is basically a mashup of kickboxing and wrestling.
The sport was banned for years in New York, but last week, Governor Cuomo signed a bill that will reverse the ban and see the sport become legal in August, giving amateurs like Mikkel a chance to turn pro. But as Adrian Ma reports, Mikkel isn't waiting around for that.
Last week on Thursday morning at Madison Square Garden, the action wasn't in the arena, but in the lobby.
Well, thank you. Good morning to all.
Governor Andrew Cuomo is flanked by several fighters from a professional MMA organization called the Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC.
You should know that some of the UFC techniques actually were not started in the UFC, but were started in New York politics. No, that's true.
After years of slugging it out in Albany, lawmakers have finally agreed to allow professional MMA fights. New York is actually the last state to legalize it. And Cuomo says legalization will make the sport safer for athletes and also bring in tens and millions of dollars in tourism and taxes.
It's great for the sport, it's great for the state, so let's sign the bill, let's make it legal. Thank you.
And with the flick of a pen, Cuomo delivered a knockout blow to a nearly 2-decade ban on the sport. Meanwhile, at a tiny martial arts gym in Kew Gardens, Jerome Mikkel is hitting the bags, running cardio drills, and sparring with his fellow fighters. Mikkel trains for 3 to 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. And with the hour-and-a-half subway ride from his home in the Bronx, it's practically a full-time job. But since MMA hasn't been legal in New York, he doesn't get paid to fight. And that's why, after training, he heads to his job as a bartender at Buffalo Wild Wings.
Hey, Captain.
Mikkel has a 5-year-old son, and he says he needs the paycheck.
I got my little man to take care of, I got a fiance, so it's like, I got goals, and the goal is for us to get out of 9-to-5 lifestyle.
Even with New York finally legalizing the sport, it'll still be several months before pro fights start to happen here. And Mikkel says he can't wait that long. That's why, for the past several months, he's been searching for pro fights out of state. Problem is, he's got baggage. Mikkel's fought 14 times in New York. Most of those fights were in something called the Underground Combat League, a scrappy, unregulated fight series. Think Fight Club, not Karate Kid.
I've seen headbutts. I've seen elbows to the face. I guess people can use the word barbaric because it was barbaric.
Tom Kilkenny promotes amateur MMA fights and has been following the MMA scene in New York for more than 2 decades.
In No Holds Barred, you were allowed to eye gouge. You were allowed to, kick in a groin. There were just so many different things that were just what I would call unethical in the way of a sport.
Unethical enough that in states where MMA is legal, fighters like Mikkel don't rank. Even though Mikkel is 12-2 in New York, in every other state, he's 0-0.
Those 14 fights, he cannot get back.
Jonathan Ruiz is Mikkel's coach.
That time that he put into training, into being away from his son, into taking off from work and losing out on money, he does not get back.
And as I'm talking to Ruiz about Mikkel, he walks in.
What's up, Coach? I didn't even tell you today. I got good news. There's a promoter out in Massachusetts. She's like, well, he's on my list, so you guys are in. I'm waiting.
We'll see till they start doing the background checks.
Yeah.
This is something I gotta do. This is not a hobby. This is not recreational for me. I can't wait for New York to finally set up something. Yeah. Even though they made it legal here, we're still waiting for them to set up something. I can't do that.
Mikkel says he's in a race against time, and he's already behind.
I already wasted 2 years by being incarcerated, so it's like, I have to catch up because I'm getting older.
At 28, Mikkel's just a few years away from an age when many MMA fighters retire. And every sore muscle, every bruise, every bloodied lip reminds him that any chance of a professional fighting career starts and ends with his body.
My knuckles are still swollen from the last fight. My body is being put into this as an investment, so I need to get something back.
And he says once he breaks into the pros, he'll be lucky if he lasts 5, maybe 6 years.
There's no longevity in MMA. One wrong kick, one wrong move, that's it. Your whole career's over.
And he accepts that. Because at the end of the day, he loves this sport.
Once the cage closes, I hear the click, and the ref slaps his glove together, my mind is on blank. There's no more bills, no baby mama drama, no family members right now. It's very hard to explain. It's like your heart is on 1,000, you're sweating, you feel it. Everything in you is tense. And once I see guys usually go from standing at 12 o'clock to go parallel with the mat, it's just a thrill, like time to celebrate.
You were saying this is about your livelihood, but I think a lot of people would hear that and say, like, there's got to be easier ways to make a livelihood than to be a professional fighter.
What job would hire me? Considering my background of me running in with the law, I'm not going to get a Fortune 500 job behind a desk.
Mikkel says success as a fighter would also give him a chance to give his son a life that he thought he couldn't provide. When he went to prison for 2 years, his son was less than a year old.
I didn't get to see my son's first steps. I didn't get to hear his first word, even though I was told it was Dada. He's going to remember because I remember, like, the time not spent. So I want him to be like, my father took me on a cruise. My father took me to Florida. My father took me to see the world and see more than just the Bronx.
Right now, Mikkel has a bout scheduled this summer in Massachusetts. And if all goes according to plan, he'll fight there in July and return to New York a pro. Until then, he'll be at the gym. Adrian Ma, Columbia Radio News.
In case you haven't been following the latest in black women's hair trends, natural is in, a big shift in an industry that generates about $500 billion a year nationally in products, weaves, and wigs. But as Shandukani Mulaudzi reports, the journey to natural hair, it's not the kind you go on. It's not the kind you go on alone.
I've recently become a naturalista. I'm a black woman who has decided to stop using chemical hair straighteners. It's just me and my curls. Now that I've made this change, it's like I'm learning a whole new way to style and maintain my hair. So I went to the Bohemian Soul Natural Hair Salon. It's in Crown Heights. It's small and intimate. Just 4 clients max with pictures of curly-haired women on the walls. Stylist Jasmine Scott is talking with Deetria Sellers, a new client. They're going over what to do with hair oils.
So this is what you'll do with the oil. Scrunch it in your hair. This foam leaves a little bit of a residue. So next time I see you, we'll try the satin lotion. But this foam is new for me.
Jasmine's been a hairstylist for 15 years. 3 years ago, she started specializing in natural styles.
I just found that experimenting and exploring the different textures of our hair has been pleasurable for me. I've learned that no one has the same texture hair. And hair is as individual as a fingerprint.
And it's so individual. That's why it's been a little tricky to figure out what to do with my hair. So, as you do when you're looking for advice on something kind of personal, there's the internet. Here's a video of a woman explaining curl types.
So type 2 hair is wavy hair. Type 3 is spiral curl, or like a curly type. And then type 4 is a much more kinkier curl pattern. So we'll go ahead and break that down into the subcategories. They have subcategories A, B, and C. There's 2 ABC, 3 ABC, and 4 ABC. So we'll go ahead and start.
According to this scale, I'm a 4C. It's the coarsest and the curliest. Jasmine says the easiest way to find out what to do is to get tips from other 4Cs.
My hair is more like yours, right? So I can say, hey, what do you do? Because your hair doesn't look dry. It looks beautiful. It looks soft. It looks healthy. So I can ask you, because this is something kind of new for all of us, you know? So even though it is individual, there are some similarities. and keep it trimmed. Please don't be scared to trim your hair.
I won't lie, I hadn't even given trimming a second thought, so I'm glad she told me that. But let's talk about how I used to style my hair for a second. Since I was little, I relaxed my hair, and relaxing loosened my curl and made it go from kinky to sleek. Relaxers contain the chemical sodium hydroxide. Comedian Chris Rock made a documentary in 2009 called Good Hair. In it, a scientist showed him how dangerous sodium hydroxide is by putting a drop on a chicken breast. Within a few minutes, the chemical burnt through the skin.
Wow. Now, you realize this goes in people's heads, right?
Sodium hydroxide?
Yeah, people, black women, some men, you know, Morris Day, Prince, put sodium hydroxide in their hair to straighten it out.
Why would they do that?
To look white.
Okay, it's a little more than just trying to look white, at least for me. I use relaxers because I thought it was easier to maintain my hair that way. Also, I wanted to look more like Gabrielle Union and other black women I saw on television. I saw that as the standard of beauty. But when I got to New York 8 months ago and realized black women in New York were proud of their kinks, I threw my Peruvian hair wig off and allowed my hair to just be. I'm learning there's so much more I can do with my hair. And back at Bohemian Soul, Deetria, Jasmine's new client, is learning the same thing.
The different styles you could do more with natural hair that I come to realize. You can coil twist, rod twist, or what is the other one? The Bantu knots. It's a variety. Or either you can just push it up and just let it just flow.
Deetria can't always let her hair flow for everyone to see though. She converted to Islam 3 years ago. She tells Jasmine her hair is covered 95% of the time.
I'm sorry, what does that matter? Does it influence anything hair-wise?
Me, it does. It's like if she's covering it with something that's cotton-based and not lining it with maybe something that's silk or satin, cotton to dry her hair out. So it's just for moisture concerns.
There's another thing. You're black and Muslim.
Yeah.
Extra effort.
Yes, it is. It really is.
Deetria tells us about another stylist she had who just didn't get it.
She was West Indian. She told me, she said, I don't know why you put that thing on your hair. It's not for our kind of people. So I'm like, huh? What do you mean? She was like, our hair have to breathe. It has to breathe. I said, okay, that was the last time I went to her though, but
she didn't get it.
No. So it's a struggle. For me, it is.
But now, that struggle to find someone to help care for her hair is over for Deetria. She has Jasmine. As for me, I'll be going back to South Africa in June, and I've already started researching some new natural hair salons that have opened up. I can't wait to begin the search for my own new hair whisperer. Shandukani Muraudzi, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Åsa Secker.
And I'm Daniel Rostis. Coming up, the search for serenity after time in solitary confinement.
It's a second-by-second attack on your soul. You start to wonder, like, if something happens to me, I wonder would anyone care? I wonder would anyone find out?
There's a known shortage of organ donors in the U.S., but it's the residents of New York State in search of a transplant who have to wait the longest.
Life in New York is a very busy hustle and bustle, right? So what we are trying to do is make it easier for everybody to sign up.
Those stories and more coming up, but first, these headlines.
In New York, I'm Nina Agrawal. Sheriff Jim Olson of Carver County, Minnesota, is giving a press conference this hour with an update on what law enforcement officials know about Prince's death. Olson said the death is under ongoing investigation and he has no reason to believe it was a suicide. Fiat Chrysler will recall 1.1 million vehicles worldwide because of fears that they may roll away after drivers get out. The BBC is reporting that the recall includes cars and mid-size SUVs whose gear shifters may confuse drivers and allow them to exit their vehicles without placing them in park. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe announced today he would restore voting rights to more than 200,000 convicted felons. The Democratic governor used his executive power to circumvent the Republican-led legislature and allow all felons who have served their prison time and finished probation or parole to register to vote. Mayor Bill de Blasio is calling on city building owners to help cut greenhouse gas emissions. The new rules are part of the mayor's One NYC plan, which aims to increase economic and environmental sustainability in the city. Nina Agarwal, Columbia Radio News.
Manhattan's having a car-free day. Kind of. Today, Broadway between the Flatiron Building and Union Square, as well as some streets around Washington Square Park and a stretch up in Washington Heights, will be closed to all traffic in honor of Earth Day.
Aaron Gulaxon went to see whether changing the flow of traffic in a crowded city like New York is an effective way to celebrate the day, or if the plan will backfire.
It's a carless day in New York. Or maybe more of a less cars day. On the diagonal stretch of Broadway between 14th and 23rd Streets, police set up their blue barricades to block off the road for a few hours. According to New York City Council Transportation Chair Adonis Rodriguez, the point was to get people thinking about how much they drive. Rodriguez helped organize today's event.
Yes, because climate change is real, and this is something that no one can dispute. And we can contribute here.
At the UN today, more than 100 leaders say they'll sign the Paris Agreement, which requires each country to submit a plan to cut down on CO2 emissions. The goal is to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. Cities like Bogota and Paris have been having car-free days for a while now to cut pollution caused by vehicles. But this is New York City's first shot. Dan Tagarelli was trying to photograph the empty streets, but it seemed some drivers didn't get the message.
It's always nice to have a car-free street, but I think, it's being done for Earth Day, and it's probably causing more traffic on other streets and more pollution, but what are you going to do?
By 10, though, most of the cars were gone, sent down other streets. Linda was walking her little Boston Terrier down the middle of Broadway. She was dropping him off at doggy daycare before work. She didn't want to share her full name because her dog, Rude Boy,
Hi, will you sit?
is kind of a big deal on social media. He has an Instagram, and she's worried his devoted fans will track him down. As for Rude Boy, he seemed a bit nervous walking in the middle of the street for a change.
Being a little bit more compassionate about the pedestrians in addition to the drivers. It's been nice. There's a lot of freedom. You don't have to worry about your dog getting run over.
Rude Boy had no comment. According to Dr. Stephen Cohen, director of the Earth Institute at Columbia, a totally car-free day just isn't going to happen soon, even in a city like New York, where a lot of people do take public transport.
Given, we have a development pattern in America of suburbs and of people whose work is not right by where they live, and so you have to get from here to there, and that in many places requires a car.
But for him, it's an important symbolic gesture.
Eventually, we're going to get rid of fossil fuels. The sooner the better. So a car-free day gets people to think, oh, I'm using fossil fuels in my daily life. I'm part of the problem of climate change. Maybe I should stop doing this as much as I do it.
Traffic down Broadway will be back to normal tomorrow, but the city hopes to expand car-free NYC on occasional weekends throughout the spring. And the hope is that the Earth Day event will be even bigger next year. Aaron Gulaxon, Columbia Radio News.
Growing from a girl into a woman can be a tricky process. It can feel awkward, embarrassing, sometimes even painful. But as commentator Elizabeth Brockway says, when your experience doesn't match that of your friends, you can also feel pretty freaked out.
I've always been a bit of a late bloomer. First crush, late. Getting my first bra, late. First kiss, late. But these delays, yeah, they made me feel awkward, but not compared to the big lateness of my life. Getting my period. I was almost 15 and halfway through my first year of high school, and I was still very much a girl. Not just emotionally, though that too, but physically. While my friends had been surfing the crimson wave for months, years even, I was enjoying a prolonged prepubescence. My pediatrician was not thrilled, so she suggested birth control pills to encourage good old flow. I felt like something was wrong with me, and no one wants to hear that, especially a teenager. While everyone seemed so thrilled about entering womanhood, I wasn't. And why should I be? The only thing I did want was not to be a freak. But then, on its own, My body decided it was time, and I became a member of the grossest club of all time. Now, the natural thing was to tell my mom. She'd teach me everything, and she could probably stop me from feeling so scared. That would have been the right move, but far too mature. Staying silent was my plan. Maybe it would go away. It didn't, so I caved, kinda. One sunny Saturday morning, while my mom was cooking, I went to our kitchen and gave her this warning. I need to tell you something, and you can't react or make a big deal of it. I'm serious. And then I broke the news. She started to react, so I walked out, back to my room, where I shut the door. Let me be clear, my mom is my greatest confidant. I can tell her anything, and I still feel bad because I know all she wanted was to be with me, her only daughter. Not because it was so wonderful, but because she knew it wasn't, and she wanted to help. But it wasn't special or exciting for me. It was awful. And even though I'd had more time to emotionally prepare than many, I still wasn't ready. And I didn't understand why I was supposed to be. To be honest, I still don't. The truth is, it sucks. It hurts. It's super gross. It makes me even more emotional than I already am. I hate it. Period. There is, of course, the obvious benefit. Should I decide and be able to, this every 28 days annoyance means I can have children. And I so look forward to that time when this literal pain in my side can become that something wonderful. But as a freshman in high school, that's not much of a silver lining. And I just needed a minute or a couple of years to process it. But now, all these years later, it's normal to talk about it with my mom. Not all the time, just, maybe once a month. And I'll have it as an optional topic of conversation about 300 more times in my life, just as I've had it somewhere around 143 times already. Yes, I counted.
More than a decade later, Elizabeth Brockway is still searching for a positive spin about this aspect of womanhood.
Earlier this month, the New York Civil Liberties Union won a class action lawsuit against the state's Department of Corrections. The aim of the case? To reform solitary confinement in prisons. The state's 4,000-strong solitary population will now drop by a quarter.
And new proposed guidelines cap the time a prisoner can stay in solitary at 90 days. But in the eyes of the UN, more than 15 days in solitary is torture. As Oliver Arnaldi reports, many think the lawsuit has not done enough for the thousands of prisoners remaining in solitary.
Johnny Perez walks in a rectangle, 6 paces long and 4 across, the size of a parking space or a small bathroom. It's tiny. We're at the Urban Justice Center in Lower Manhattan, a non-profit that advocates for vulnerable New Yorkers.
This is a space where I spent 3 years of my life being boxed in a human cage.
In 2000, Perez was sentenced to 13 years in prison for robbery and spent 3 of those in solitary confinement. In New York prisons, when you break a rule, a correctional officer gives you what's called a ticket. Perez got many tickets for what he calls minor offences, like cursing at inmates.
One time I went to the box for 60 days for having a frying pan, which they considered contraband.
And while the Urban Justice Center is light and airy, he remembers his 6x9 cell differently.
The space is very hot, so hot that the walls start to sweat. No direct sunlight comes inside the cell. And you look around, there's nothing but a metal bed and a mattress, this small table with a pull-out metal bench, and this is your home.
Imagine spending 23 hours a day like this, with no visitors and almost no interaction.
Played chess with one of my neighbors for about 6 months. We played like once or twice a week.
Through the vent that connected their cells, they made chess pieces out of tissues and boards out of paper, and they'd call through the vent to say where they moved their pieces.
And the whole time I never knew what he looked like.
Then Perez's neighbor left, so he had to find his own ways to cope.
Keep a calendar, you get a watch if you can. You iron your clothes. You try to wake up in the morning as if you're going somewhere.
But Perez says there is only so much he could do.
It's a second-by-second attack on your soul. Every second is spent thinking about what's the next minute going to feel like or the next day. And you start to wonder, if something happens to me, I wonder would anyone care? I wonder would anyone find out?
This kind of experience is what Alex Reiner, a lawyer working with the New York Civil Liberties Union, has been trying to change for the past 2 years. He wants to see solitary confinement ended.
By the end of the 19th century, the Supreme Court had said it was a failed experiment, drove people mad. That was in 1893.
Solitary as punishment had been adopted from European penal regimes, but by the end of the 19th century, courts realised it didn't work. But it came back in force during the 1960s as prison staff felt they had fewer tools to deal with prison violence. And by the 90s, the creation of solitary-only regimes had become widespread. The Civil Liberties Union lawsuit aimed to turn back the clock by reducing the population and capping first-time stays in solitary to 3 months. But
of course, the devil's in the details. Technically, these aren't time caps, these are guidelines.
The terms of the settlement are suggestions, not requirements.
And so if an officer wants to go higher or lower, they can go higher or lower.
But if the UN states that keeping someone in solitary for above 15 days is torture, why is this still happening? Psychologist David Cloud says it's down to a culture of justice in the United States focused on locking people up, not rehabilitating them.
It's kind of a vicious cycle for people. You can land in a solitary confinement environment and kind of go mad. Those behaviors can lead to more infractions, more disturbances, worse relationships with correctional officers.
And he says the lack of mental health staff in New York prisons is a part of this problem. On Rikers Island, there is one mental health worker for 40 inmates, so correctional officers can become the first ports of call for mental health issues. But they're guards, not doctors.
They may receive a little bit of training, a very quick crash course on mental health, but prisons and jails were never designed to be hospitals.
Which can make the transition to the outside world difficult. Back at the Urban Justice Center, Johnny Perez remembers finally getting out.
And you finally get to look in the mirror, and you realize that you have this big Santa Claus beard, this big 1970s afro, and you're like, wow, I don't even look like myself anymore.
After 3 years in total isolation, a 2-hour bus ride took him to the middle of Times Square. He hadn't crossed a road in 13 years, so he stood frozen on the sidewalk, taking it all in.
You can hear all of these different sounds, whether it's cars with their horns blaring, music, movie previews, the sound of a child's laughter. There's no kids in jail. All of these things hitting you all at once.
Perez says New York City continues to be a place that overwhelms him. He suffers from anxiety and paranoia. He hates taking the subway and being touched. But his friend Chris Acosta is even worse. He develops symptoms of depression while in solitary at the same time as Perez, and often can't leave the house because of panic attacks.
They make you feel like you're having a heart attack. And when you're not having a panic attack, you're having anxiety over the next time that you might have a panic attack, and it just kind of becomes a spiral.
Acosta produces hip-hop as a way of battling his anxiety, but he feels that he is still learning about how solitary affected him.
Until you get back into normal society and you realize how that experience has changed you, nothing could really prepare you for how it's actually going to be.
As for Perez, he recently got a job at the Urban Justice Center, where he provides the type of re-entry support that he feels was lacking for him and others like Acosta. This year, he's advocating for a new law, the Halt Solitary Confinement Act. If passed, no prisoner in the United States would be kept in solitary for longer than 15 days. Oliver Arnoldi, Columbia Radio News.
There's a list in New York State, a list you likely don't want to be on. It's overseen by a nonprofit, and it's a list of patients waiting for an organ transplant. Reporter Laura Gamba spent time with one family, waiting and hoping the search for their daughter's new kidney will soon be over.
Kimberly Cuesta isn't like most 14-year-olds. She doesn't go to school or play with her friends. In fact, she isn't able to leave the house very much because of her precarious health. But according to her mother, Patricia, things weren't always this way.
We used to take her to the park. She used to run, to walk. She was a happy child.
Everything changed when Kimberly was 5 years old. Doctors discovered an unusual amount of protein in her urine. Then her face started to swell and her eyes started to bulge.
We thought maybe it was food poisoning. So we talked to the doctor and he said it can be an allergy.
But it wasn't an allergy. Doctors ordered a biopsy of Kimberly's kidney and found that it was only working at 30%. Kimberly was diagnosed with FSGS, a rare disease that produces scarring on her kidneys, which has caused them to fail. She started dialysis right then.
I have to take to the doctor every time like the catheter fell off on the floor or she touched with dirty hands because she can catch infections. So the doctor has to put an antibiotic on her belly.
Which is what brings us here, to this first floor bedroom in the Cuesta home in Staten Island, where Patricia is preparing the tubes and fluids that will do the work that Kimberly's kidneys should be doing. A catheter pokes out of Kimberly's abdomen, and a fluid runs through it into her belly. After a while, the fluid leaves her body through the same tube to another bag.
Dwelling like an hour and then drain it out and then again.
It's hard to watch, honestly, but it's their routine. Patricia gives Kimberly an iPad to distract her through the process, but it seems Kimberly has gotten used to it. The last part is what Kimberly hates the most, and oddly, it's the least invasive part of the procedure, having her blood pressure checked. Because all of this is made more difficult by the fact that Kimberly is autistic. Before having a kidney failure, she did all stuff kids do, but now her condition means it's hard to know how to treat her, how to help her. Dr. Sander Florman, director of the Transplant Institute at Mount Sinai, is part of the medical team overseeing Kimberly's care. He says dialysis does not replace a kidney.
That machine replaces about 20% of the kidney function. You can't eat or drink what you want, and the majority of those people aren't able to work, travel, and their chances of having a heart attack or a stroke go up dramatically.
So Kimberly needs a kidney, but whether she'll get it or not, that's not easy to know. In 2014, Kimberly was added to the long New York State organ waiting list. There are about 10,000 other New Yorkers waiting for an organ. According to Dr. Florman, it's not easy to get off that list.
If you look at the people waiting for a kidney transplant, the average wait, depending on your blood type, is anywhere from 3 to 7 years.
And unfortunately,
the higher waits are in places like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, where there are greater burdens of disease and more people.
Simply put, more sick people in New York means the line is longer. But there are other reasons that explain why the wait is so long.
We have a little problem because our enrollment process has been very difficult.
Julia Rivera is the communications director of Live On New York, the organization in charge of getting the available organ to the right organ receiver in the list. She says they didn't have an online system for many years. Now they do, though it isn't exactly ideal. Rivera says it's hard to navigate. This is something Live On is trying to fix.
Life in New York is a very busy hustle and bustle, right? So what we are trying to do is make it easier for everybody to sign up.
And the theory is that an easier sign-up would mean more organs for people like Kimberly. A year ago, she was number 4 on the list. Patricia was happy. She felt her daughter had never been so near her life-saving kidney. They waited, and then...
They called me, they say they have a kidney that is matched for Kimberly.
But her kidney failure has a side effect, seizures, that made a transplant more difficult. The doctors went back and forth on this. Was Kimberly strong enough for the complicated surgery she needed, or did her seizures make it too dangerous?
Her doctor, Dr. Okolo, that's a neurologist doctor, they faxed a letter saying that she's okay to receive a kidney. That is not an issue because the seizure is controlling, she's taking medicine.
But by the time the letter arrived, it was too late. The kidney wasn't available anymore. It had gone to someone else. And this happened again a couple of months later. Patricia was called once more to go to the hospital because there was a compatible organ for Kimberly. When they were packing their things to go, they received devastating news.
They said it wasn't very healthy for Kimberly. But we were happy, crying for happiness, and then later we crying for sadness.
Kimberly gets worse every day. She throws up nearly everything she eats. She's skinny and pale and in constant pain. Besides being on dialysis all the time, she takes medicine for seizure.
For the acidity, for the stomachache.
For blood pressure.
For potassium, the phosphorus for the food, the medicine for sleep.
But that's not the hardest part.
There is some days that she just cry for no reason. And I cry with her too, because it's very hard, you know. I don't know what to do to help her.
The one thing she does know how to ask her mother is to scratch her.
Hey.
That is Kimberly saying itching. It's one of the few words she knows because she constantly feels as if her body were burning. Her mother helps her out. There are good days too. Patricia says Kimberly remembers nice moments of the past sometimes.
¿Qué te causó gracia? ¿Qué te acordaste? ¿Algo te acordaste? Que ella cuando se acuerda algo se ríe, no sé qué, como no puede avisar.
She hopes that the next available kidney is A positive, but AB and O positive are also a good match for Kimberly. She anxiously waits for the call. How anxious? She has to switch to her native Spanish to explain.
Cuando mi teléfono suena, veo Monte Sinaí o algo, mi corazón late más rápido porque...
When the phone rings with a number from Mount Sinai, Patricia says her heart races. And until they get that call, they're not willing to give up. Laura Gamba, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Åsa Secker. On today's show, we're trying something new, exploring a theme.
And I'm Daniel Rostis, and that theme is searching. Coming up, we'll take you to a community of senior citizens in Brooklyn who escape the isolation of our tech-driven world by playing bingo.
I mean, we're social beings, so I guess in some ways it's pretty self-evident, right? That as social beings, we need places in which to be social.
Prince fans were shocked to learn about the passing of the iconic singer yesterday. Some gathered at a party hosted by Spike Lee to pay tribute.
Love it because 30 instruments, a beautiful bravado, a beautiful soprano, everything about him was beautiful.
Those stories and more coming up, but first, these headlines.
In New York, I'm Nina Agarwal. The sheriff of Carver County, Minnesota, who is leading the investigation into Prince's death, said in a press conference earlier this hour that there were no obvious signs of trauma on Prince's body. The sheriff has recruited a crime lab to help with the investigation, but said that is not unusual in the case of an unattended death. 8 people have been shot to death in rural Ohio, law enforcement officials say. All of the victims are believed to be members of the same family. Officials said in a statement that the situation is not being treated as an active shooting and no arrests have been made. The Cuban government announced today it is lifting the maritime ban on Cuban-born Americans, allowing them to sail with Carnival cruises when it makes its first trip to Cuba in over half a century on May 1st. CEO Arnold Donald said Carnival negotiated the change in Cuban policy after receiving complaints from the Cuban-American community.
And we're just grateful that the noise that got generated, didn't really blow the process up.
The New York Stock Exchange plans to delist former retail giant Aeropostale, whose clothes were once ubiquitous in teens' closets. The company's stock, which once traded above $30, last traded at 15 cents yesterday afternoon. The company said today it has no plans to appeal the delisting. It's sunny and 77 degrees outside, with thunderstorms expected this evening. Nina Agarwal, Columbia Radio News.
In the wake of Prince's death yesterday, the music world was stopped in its tracks.
Last night in Brooklyn, movie director Spike Lee held a dance party at his studio to stop and pay tribute to the celebrated musician. Uptown Radio reporter Jakai Johnson was there and joins us live in the studio. So how was it, Jakai?
It was great. One of the first things I learned was that everybody loved Prince, and each for their very own reasons. He was so many things to so many people. Heidi Garner was one of them.
He was little, he was big, he was talented, he was smart, he rocked harder than anyone else, and he was beautiful, and everyone from every culture, race, gender loved him.
It was clear that Prince meant so many things to many people, particularly for the Black community. Longtime fan Rashida Robinson said she appreciated the positive energy that Prince exuded.
He was the wonderful Black male that showed me that Black women were beautiful. And he wanted to let everybody know that you are who you are. Love it because 30 instruments, a beautiful bravado, a beautiful soprano, everything about him was beautiful.
Yes, beautiful indeed. Actress Erica Alexander from the hit 90s sitcom Living Single was also at the dance party. She sang along and said Prince influenced Black people both on and off the screen.
Prince, I grew up with Prince, like a lot of people did, but he was like an alien sent from another planet down to Earth to show us the true meaning of rock and roll, funk, and soul. And as far as I'm concerned, he did more than his job. He empowered not only musicians and songwriters like himself, women who he wrote most of his lyrics for, groups, but he also empowered Black people. He's like Harriet. He's trying to show us the promised land.
There were so many people there wearing purple shirts, purple jackets, shirts from tours, and one in particular who stood out was Anton Niblett, who wore his favorite Prince shirt.
This sweatshirt is from the Emancipation Tour. It's got Prince's face, it's all black, and it's just Prince in silhouette in the front in white. So it's just the impact. It's just, you don't need to say anything else other than you look at the face, and that's everything.
I spoke with Jim McGuinn, program director of Minnesota Public Radio show The Current, and he shared how Prince impacted his hometown of Minneapolis when the station threw a local concert at First Avenue, the club from Purple Rain, the movie.
And he came down, and the thing he said to me was so amazing, because he said,
I am here because you guys are here for the community. So I want to support you because you support the musicians in this community.
Prince will be remembered all over the world by everyone, and his generosity, love, and commitment to music will live on. Funeral arrangements haven't been released yet.
Jakai Johnson, thank you so much for that report.
And tomorrow marks the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. His plays have been adapted, remixed, and reworded thousands of times in multiple languages all over the globe. From a flash mob in Bryant Park to an off-Broadway theater production, reporter Amina Lovell tells us how the Bard's fans are celebrating.
If you are searching for somewhere to celebrate tonight, the Drilling Company will have a full brass band, a jazz funeral for Shakespeare at 6:30 in Bryant Park. Amina Lovell, Columbia Radio News.
Maybe they kept it on. We are experiencing some technical difficulties. We're going to move on to the next story, which is about Eurovision, if I'm not mistaken. Eurovision Song Contest, what could be more exciting? It's coming up May 14th, so only a couple of weeks left.
I mean, I love it. I watch it all the time, every year if I can. Last year, I actually went to a bar specifically to watch it, which, I mean, they let Australia in last year, which was rather strange, but now we're going to go to that story.
Let's hear it. People, there are a lot of us looking for our countrymen. Take me, for example. I'm Swedish. We're not really known for big gatherings, but we have a really big event coming up. On May 14th, it's the Eurovision Song Contest. And because the winner was Sweden last year, it's in Stockholm this year, my hometown. It's such a big deal that there's a Facebook event for Swedes in New York looking for other Swedes to watch it with. I got in touch with one of them.
So my name is Agnetha, which gets butchered a lot. It's a typical Swedish name, so I usually go by Agnes or Aggie.
I want Agnetha to tell you a little bit about herself, and I'm going to let her do it to the tones of ABBA's Waterloo, which actually won the Eurovision in 1974.
Well, I mean, when I first came to New York when I was 16, I found New York to be so magical. Like, you're excited to be here and you're not really that homesick. But, with the years and as I've gotten older, I feel that I've become more, sentimental and nostalgic. You kind of start thinking more about your identity and, where you come from, where you grew up and, the country that shaped you. And I think you kind of start looking for that connection with people who, share the same background, the same language, culture, and traditions.
So back to the Eurovision. This is the song that won last year by Swedish Måns Zelmerlöw. When I grew up, there was one qualifying competition when we decided which entry to send to the European finale. It has grown a lot since then. Now it starts in February, and there are 6 semifinals until March. Every week you vote for your favorite, kind of like American Idol. And then the winner at the very end gets to compete with 42 other countries in the big European finale.
Watching the Eurovision it's huge. It's usually the whole family and friends get together. It's like a whole feast, they're having a party, food and drinks. And, you usually, the way I've done it is, you have a piece of paper, you write down like the countries, who you think will win. And then, they're voting. And obviously you're always cheering for Sweden. It's that bond that you have with people who are from the same country as you are. There's like a certain cultural difference with Americans. Like, my boyfriend is American and he often talks about American football and baseball. And I don't know any of that. Like, I grew up with soccer and I watched Zlatan Ibrahimovic play soccer. And, like the Eurovision Song Contest. There's certain events and people that only other Swedes will know about. So it's that connection, that bond that you're looking for, with people who are from the same country as you.
Summer's almost here, and as the Beach Boys sing, if everybody had an ocean across the USA, then everybody'd be surfing, like California.
This week, Katie Ferguson headed out to the Rockaways with one California surfer in search of the waves of New York City.
When Chrisman Payne moved to New York in January, he thought he was leaving behind one of his favorite California pastimes, surfing. In Ventura, where Payne grew up, getting to the beach was as simple as walking just past his own backyard.
I live on the beach, sort of. It's like I walk down my lane and it ends in sand.
His street on the Upper West Side of Manhattan? Significantly further from the sand.
We're on the A train, going to the beach.
Which beach?
The Rockaways. Yeah, so we're towards the end of the line here, I think. I think we're towards the end of the line. Honestly, we've been in the subway for a while now, so I don't really know.
This is Payne's day off, and he's never seen an East Coast beach. We're going to see if it can hold its own against California. Eventually, our train comes above ground, but we've still got a ways to go. And we've already been on the train for 45 minutes.
I think it gets kind of inconvenient to go this far at some point.
Can you imagine making this trip with a surfboard?
No, I can't. That would be really annoying, actually.
Especially annoying because our trip doesn't end with the A train. Next, we hop onto a bus. How long does it take us to get to the beach? I'm not sure. We got lost, and I stopped counting. But when we finally do make it, Payne is able to classify the waves immediately.
We're looking at some double over ankle sets coming in.
What's that?
It's just a joke, like double over ankle is like exactly what it sounds like, a wave that's double over your ankle.
So, really, really small. I think this is what surfers would call a bummer. The waves are unsurfable. Or so we think.
There's actually some surfers over there. I don't know what they're surfing, but looks fun.
For surfers in New York City, sometimes you've got to take what you can get. And often, that's not much, according to veteran city surfer Toddy Stewart.
It's harder to surf. Absolutely. It's more fickle. The waves have to come in at exactly the right angle to make a surfable wave.
Stewart is a filmmaker, and I meet him at his studio in Greenpoint, where there are not one, but two surfboards hanging from the ceiling. He also grew up on the West Coast, but he's been surfing in New York for almost 20 years. For the last 8, Stewart has been writing about it, too, on his blog, the aptly titled Endless Bummer. But he says he's had his share of magic moments here, where one New Yorker's natural disaster is another New Yorker's perfect beach day.
The best days are always the hurricane days. A couple of years ago, I went out and just caught these amazing, big, rolling, way overhead waves, and there wasn't anybody else around. No one was in the water. I don't even remember the hurricane. I don't think it was Sandy. Sandy was too gnarly.
Well, that's one word for it. And while some hurricanes wind up being too gnarly, regular days aren't much more predictable. But if anyone could give you some informed guesses about the New York swell, it's Tyler Brewer. He's a native Long Islander whose family's surf shop in Levittown is turning 50 this year. He's surfed all over New York since he was a kid. But over a beer in Gowanus, he tells me that even he isn't sure when the waves are going to be good.
You can miss it by an hour. You could go down and look at the conditions. It looks great, get suited up, dive into the water, and all of a sudden the wind switches or the tide comes up, and then all of a sudden it just went to crap really quickly.
And because the waves are unreliable, it makes the surfers that way too.
It ends up screwing up a lot of times your plans. You said you'd have brunch, but then the surf became really good.
The song that just happens to be on in the bar while we're talking about this? California Dreamin'. And it's true. It's not just that the waves are more consistent out west. There are a lot of other things that surfers there just don't have to deal with. Like gear. In California, all you need is a board and a pair of shorts. In New York?
Here you need board shorts, spring suit, full suit, like a 3mm full suit. Then you need a 5mm full suit. You need boots, you need gloves. Then you need a place to store those. You need a place to dry them. They smell horrible.
I don't know what some of those words mean, but I don't really care. I do want to know about that smell, though. I can't use the words Brewer used to describe it at first, but eventually I catch a whiff of what he's saying. A word that I can say on the radio. What does it smell like?
Urine. Urine and feet.
That's bad no matter where you are. But in a tiny 600 square foot New York apartment, Brewer used to live in one of those, and he'd leave his wetsuit to dry in the bathroom.
It would stink up the whole place, the whole apartment. It's like, well, what are you going to do? You have to let it dry somehow. Otherwise, it's going to deteriorate, and it's also going to smell even worse.
And Brewer says maybe even more brutal than that smell is getting up at 5:45 in the morning, in the winter. That's when the waves are best in New York. And putting on that wetsuit in a parking lot when it's below zero.
It's definitely takes like that extra talking up or talking yourself into it. You're like, okay, we're going to do this. We can do it. All right, the waves look all right. We can do this. It's not going to be bad. It's not going to be bad. It's going to be good.
Because according to Brewer and Toddy Stewart, when it's good, it's really good. And that's what keeps them coming back. The thrill of having those really great surf days, in spite of the dank wetsuits, the canceled brunches, and the long rides on the A train. A trip Chris and Payne may just be making again soon.
If they're breaking like this, at this tide level, then that just means with more swell it'll be a little bit better. So I actually want to come back.
And just like that, with that unwavering optimism you have to hit the beach here, another New York surfer is born. As long as the waves cooperate. Katie Ferguson, Columbia Radio News.
Catch a wave and you're sitting on top of the world. Don't be afraid to try the greatest sport around.
From the beach in Queens to a bingo hall in Brooklyn, call them old-fashioned, but that's where one group of senior citizens goes in search of community, sometimes as often as 6 nights a week.
They meet friends, gossip, eat, and play game after game. As Nina Agarwal reports, having a place to do that is still important in our technology-driven world.
Marie Petrillo has been playing bingo for more than 40 years. But when asked how many times she's won, she laughs.
Oh, God. It's so few, I can't even count. This is not a game to win. No, absolutely not.
Petrillo plays bingo at the Fifth Avenue Bingo Hall in Park Slope almost every night. And she's prepared. She has her own set of chips, a magnetic wand to scoop them up, and special markers, bottles of ink for the paper bingo sheets. She's got her eye on the prize, but for her, winning isn't really the point. What do you like about it? What do you like about this game in particular?
The quietness, not of the people, the quietness of the game, and that I'm out and doing something that I really, really like and affordable. That's the most important.
On top of that, she says, she loves the people.
I'm like the mayor there. Everybody comes over to me. They hug me. They kiss me. They all give me their phone numbers, They call me, see if I'm okay, whatever, if I need anything. So basically, the place is really nice to me.
Petrillo usually comes to bingo with her 2 sisters-in-law. They sit in folding chairs at one of the long linoleum tables that line the room, under tubes of fluorescent light. The hall smells like smoke, even though there's no smoking allowed. A lottery-type machine in the front spits out numbers, and a woman with a platinum blonde bouffant calls them out about every 18 seconds. At a time when screens and apps dominate many of our social interactions, the existence of bingo halls is a reminder that people still crave physical spaces in which to socialize.
I mean, we're social beings, so I guess in some ways it's pretty self-evident, right? That as social beings, we need places in which to be social.
Manissa Maharaval is a PhD candidate in anthropology at CUNY. She says it's important to have spaces just for socializing, for hanging out, which is different from spending money at a mall or a restaurant. She says dedicated social space is critical for building communities.
You don't create community unless you have a space in which to do that.
People have sort of forgotten how to participate in public life.
Ethan Kent is Senior Vice President at the Project for Public Spaces, a nonprofit research and advocacy group.
But when they do find these places, when they're given the opportunity, they are making these connections.
Which Kent says are important for people to build social networks that contribute to health and longevity.
It's spaces like these that develop the social capital that has very functional purposes in sustaining our our networks for health, again, for education, for basic needs as well.
Meaning that people can rely on their social networks, not just the ones online, for a ride to a doctor's appointment if they're sick or extra help with a kid or grandkid. Kent says today we spend much of our lives in our homes and offices, but historically we used to gather a lot more in third spaces, leisure spaces like town squares, parks, and pubs.
Our relationships are created and sustained through our relationship to these places. And it's the culture of our neighborhood, the identity of our neighborhood that's formed and preserved in these places.
Back when Petrillo was growing up, that place was Borough Park, Brooklyn. That's where she first started going to bingo with her grandmother.
The mayor of the bingo, that's her. That's who I take after. And everybody knew her. And she was the candy lady. She would bring bags and bags of candy in her pocketbook so that during intermission we could sit there. Instead of buying things, we would just actually, she'd have everything I wanted in her little goodie bag, I used to call it.
Petrillo's grandmother died when she was 96.
And as a matter of fact, she left me her bingo stuff. She left me her chips, all her bottles, her wands, and that means a lot to me. I didn't need money or anything else.
After games, Petrillo and her grandmother used to go to a friend's apartment for coffee and cake. Now Petrillo and her sisters-in-law head to a diner in Dyker Heights to meet up with other family members. Maharaval, the CUNY grad student, says technology has changed things for younger people, making it easy for them to socialize from behind a screen. But she says, just because people are texting or posting on Instagram doesn't mean they'll skip the park on a nice day.
What we're seeing with technology is that social media has a role, but that actually physical space is still, if not more so, important. People are really crave material, sensory connections that you have in actual space that you cannot get from social media.
She says that's one reason co-working spaces and trends like crafting clubs are becoming so popular among young people. It's that desire to connect in person. Petrillo is on Facebook, and she says she's enjoyed using it to get back in touch with old friends. But it's just not the same as the bingo hall.
Oh, and the bingo hall, you could actually, you're one-on-one talking with each other. I don't think I'll miss a heartbeat in bingo. Yeah, on Facebook, I just might.
So it's no surprise what her plans are for tomorrow night. And probably the next day, and the day after that. So are you going to bingo tomorrow night?
Absolutely. Already made plans. You coming?
She hopes she wins, but if she doesn't, it's no big deal. Nina Agarwal, Columbia Radio News.
Tomorrow marks the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. His plays have been adapted, remixed, and reworded thousands of times in multiple languages all over the globe. From a flash mob in Bryant Park to an off-Broadway theater production, reporter Amina Lovell tells us how the Bard's fans are celebrating.
The lunch crowd at Bryant Park was likely not expecting Shakespeare today, but Adam Huff is standing on a park bench, delivering a monologue from Julius Caesar.
Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers! Thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived in the tide of times! Woe to that hand that shed this costly blood!
When he's done, he walks to the back of the park and gathers with about 19 others around a fountain. It's a flash mob, Shakespeare style. The group starts shouting out lines from plays like Hamlet, Julius Caesar, and Henry V.
Return thee, therefore, with a flood of tears, and wash away thy country's stained spots. Besides, all French in France exclaims on thee.
Organizer of this melee is Hamilton Clancy from the Drilling Company, an agency for budding playwrights, actors, and musicians. He says Shakespeare can act as a bridge in literature, and that's why he organized this impromptu meeting.
And so that's been our approach all the time, is to say that Shakespeare is for everybody, and everybody is for Shakespeare.
The crowd is varied, some festively dressed with capes and gowns, others making grand hand gestures trying to sell the scene to the large crowd. Huff says that's the whole point of Shakespeare.
Shakespeare's so about the audience. You can't do Shakespeare without an audience. They are the other character in the scene.
The audience in the park this afternoon were jaded New Yorkers, but last night at Roy Area Studios, the crowd was fully engaged. In a small room covered with stacks of library books, 5 actors play out Macbeth while ad-libbing lines.
Be not hold your children shall be kings, when those that gave the fane of Cawdor to me promised no less to them.
That trusted home might yet enkindle you unto the crown. You're gonna be king, brah.
I don't want to think about it too much, I'll just go crazy.
Oh, we don't want that.
The Drunk Shakespeare Society recites line after line of prose every night while drunk. The troupe is always interacting with the crowd. Making Shakespeare something fun and accessible is one of their aims.
People, and I used to be one of them, have an impression of what Shakespeare is, that it's this very stuffy thing, that it's very highbrow.
Monique Sanchez played Lady Macbeth last night.
People come here and they have a good time and they understand it and they laugh and then they say, it just seemed like you guys were just having fun and I was part of you guys having fun and that I was like in that. That's just really great and really cool.
If you are searching for somewhere to celebrate tonight, the Drilling Company will have a full brass band, a jazz funeral for Shakespeare at 6:30 in Bryant Park. Amina Lovell, Columbia Radio News.
When you think of home, what does it mean to you? What does home look like in your mind? Are you headed there right now, or is home someplace in your past? Maybe you're still searching for it. After searching for years, commentator Tyler Pratt has finally found his home.
I'm having an affair. Every time I close my eyes, I'm not here. I leave New York, and suddenly I'm not in a hurry. I inhale, and I'm wrapped in the embrace of a New Orleans night in spring. A light breeze rolls off the winding Mississippi. The city's in bloom, and jasmine fills the air. I walk down rickety, cobblestoned, and broken streets. Gas lamps flicker in the night, winking to say hello. I nod and smile, and lift a cold glass of bourbon to my lips. My mind wanders further back to when I first came to this magical place, strolling down Burgundy with ghosts of the French Quarter, smoking a cigarette as I rode a bicycle down Esplanade, looking in wonder at the grand southern houses with their columns and porches and decorations, black, gold, purple, and green, dining on freshly shucked charbroiled oysters, piping hot and overflowing with garlic and butter. And the music, swelling in my heart. Trumpets, trombones, saxophones, and sousaphones, New Orleans brass, full of energy and life, pounding, giving joy to a city that has known so much pain and strife. And suddenly I open my eyes, and I'm back in New York. I'm on the subway. This is my stop. I've got some place to be. There's no time for daydreaming. And it makes me sad. I've been returning to New Orleans every free moment I get for 5 years now, and I cry every time I come back. My friends make fun of me. You're not even from there, they say, and they're right. I'm from the deserts of West Texas, mesquite trees and oil rigs. Swamps and voodoo and Spanish moss shouldn't feel like home, but they do. This is where I'm supposed to be. But I worry, am I just acting like a typical millennial, chasing happiness, searching for the next new thing? Am I appropriating, taking someone else's culture and making it my own? Am I part of something larger, like gentrification? Young white people taking over a city that is low income and black and changing it? New Orleans' history is steeped in slavery, terrible racism, and one of our nation's greatest catastrophes. When Katrina hit and the levees broke, the city was flooded, looted, abandoned, houses ruined, lives destroyed, and family, friends, and neighbors, somewhere over 1,000, dead, drowned, disappeared. The New Orleans I know is a different city than it once was. Yes, it's come back, but it still suffers. Crime and murder rates remain high, incarcerations too. The education system is on the mend, but poverty is still a big issue. But here's the thing. Through it all, New Orleans still makes time for joy. It comes together in second lines, Zydeco, frozen French 75s, fried seafood, beans and rice, parades, dancing in the street, and celebrating together. Weekly, daily. In New Orleans, if you haven't recently been laughing with strangers and living up the good life, then you're doing it wrong. Every day the city reminds you that it is special, unique, and magical. I may not have been born in New Orleans, but she calls to me, and soon it won't just be an affair. I'm on my way to making her my partner, my friend, to support when times are tough, to raise up when they're good, making sure her voice is heard, educating myself on her history, and participating in her community. New Orleans will be my home. I'm headed back there soon, and you should come visit. Call me up when you do, because after a night out with me, you might just discover that you belong there too.
And that was Tyler Pratt on his love of New Orleans. Well, that does it for this special edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Stephen Basaha. Leading our staff of reporters were senior producers Tyler Pratt and Elizabeth Brockway.
Director Adele Imbert coordinated our studio production with Shandakandi Malaudzi and Katie Ferguson.
Our web team, Adrian Ma and Jeffy Bernard, got this stream live to the web. Senior editor Allison Vickerbeck and assistant editor Henriette Shakar led our copy team.
Our instructors Carrie Donahue, Danielle Alarcon, Sally Herships, and Matt Collette advised our staff. I'm Daniel Rostis.
And I'm Åsa Secker. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. If you're searching for more episodes of Uptown Radio, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.